Welcome back to another episode of the Done Deal Show. I'm joined again by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very well, thank you. Fresh back from Paris and the Champions League final. Not a bad life.
No, not bad at all. And how was the final, the atmosphere? I mean, obviously there was the big delay and all the issues outside, but how was it in general?
I think those delays made the game a little bit flat, and there was such a long gap, for example, between You'll Never Walk Alone from the Liverpool end and the kickoff, which was delayed by 36 minutes. Real Madrid managed the game, even though whenever their player through Courtois as a goalkeeper is a man of the match, as Klopp pointed out, the team on the losing side are always going to be a bit disappointed, because if a goalkeeper's that influential, it also tells you that Liverpool had their chances. But I think Real just do what they always do, and that is find a way to win these kind of finals. And Liverpool have had an amazing season, a brilliant season, and that should not be taken away from them. They played every available match to them. They won a domestic double. And the only thing they'll be naturally disappointed about is that those two trophies came on penalties. They didn't score in either final. They didn't score in the Champions League final. So that big occasion, particularly offensively, has had three instances, even though they won two of those finals, where their firepower failed to do the damage that perhaps we expected. And when you look at Real Madrid in particular and the kind of games that they've had so far up to that final, the assumption from most, certainly in the media, was we were going to get a relatively free-flowing and open game. Yeah. And I think that if the disallowed goal from Real had stood, perversely, it could have benefited Liverpool, because that would have given them a half-time talk and then even more time. But the game stayed 0-0. It got a little bit flat. Real got the early lead. Trent Alexander-Arnold was unfortunately caught out of position. And then, of course, Liverpool gave it a go. But by that stage, Real were just able to manage the game. And nobody likes to go behind in a match. But if you're going to fall behind in a final, sometimes, as I say, perversely, it can actually be better, especially against a team like Real, to go down earlier, then to change your tactics. And at that point, it wouldn't at all have surprised me if Liverpool had come back into the game. So there's lessons learned, but let's take nothing away from the tremendous season that Liverpool have had. And I know that non-Liverpool fans perhaps mocked the fact that the day after there they were celebrating and doing a parade, but I think it's exactly the right call, because the season they've had, whether that was two trophies as we've seen, or three or four, definitely deserves celebration, because it takes something to get so far in every possible area Liverpool were challenging.
Of course, and one of the things I saw a lot of Liverpool fans talk about it being a failure of a season. I would use the word disappointing, because they went big. They tried to win every tournament, and being a fan of Manchester United, we've had a few teams that were capable of winning 2-3 trophies, 4 trophies in a season, and it's exhausting and it's tiring, and they're just kind of some circumstances and everything else run slightly out of steam. But the great thing for Liverpool fans is they'll have a good transfer window, I'm sure. They always tend to, even if it doesn't look that good on the surface, they always end up doing very well. They'll be back again next year, really pushing hard, no doubt. And obviously, good experience for yourself over there. And the transfer window now starts. And I'm sure your DMs and I'm sure your replies are on fire at the moment. You know, I know, not to blow smoke, but you know, whenever I share that you're coming on and what do you want to talk about, the amount of people that is my favorite journalist, especially for Chelsea, especially for this club, that club. So a lot of people really care about what you've got to say. And we've got a lot of updates for people today, or information or questions that they've been posing to us online. A lot to do with Chelsea, a bit of Tottenham in there. We're going to talk a little bit about Nuno and Dembele, Tchouameni, modric, and a few others as well. But I think one of the teams that's sort of disappointing into the season for them, really, Chelsea. They've had this takeover now. Everything is complete. And I know you've kind of kept them abreast every step along the way. What's expected now that it's done? I know we spoke Jules Kounde last week. There's, of course, talks about Lukaku maybe exiting and him having talks with Inter and Bayern Munich are involved. If we focus on Chelsea to start with, what are the incomings looking like right now?
I think that Chelsea will be very pleased with their season. The disappointment was around the instability and the uncertainty, but given all of that, the men and the women's teams will be delighted, I think, with how they finished the season. Chelsea had a few wobbles in their last kind of 5 or 6 games, and to some extent were looking behind them. But I don't think their Champions League qualification was ever in significant doubt. And they finished 3rd, and they've won a couple of trophies. And now the big thing is around how do you replace either players that have exited, i.e. Tony Rudiger, or possibly will exit. And there's a whole list of sort of potential outgoings. So the Chelsea ownership group coming in have got 2 tasks. One is to pin down players that they can still keep. And there'll be interest, for example, in Mason Mount. They'll want to offer him a new contract. The same goes for Reece James. Christian Pulisic's future needs sorting as well. My understanding there remains that the Chelsea ownership group would like to keep him. That's not based solely upon his nationality, because he's American and so is the majority of the new ownership group. It's also because they look at his age and potential, even though many Chelsea fans are a little bit disappointed with the consistency of his football, particularly in the back end of the season. So then naturally, when you have that level of outgoings, Chelsea need to bring in some players, and Kounde is still likely to be the first. The last time we spoke, the new ownership group were not officially in at Chelsea. Now they are. The sanctions have been lifted, and Kounde and Chelsea have been in talks, even though they couldn't progress them for a number of weeks. He's been in London, and Chelsea look likely to activate the 69 million transfer fee. And that could well be, in fact, it probably now will be, the first signing of the Bowley era. And centre-back is the first position, really, where Chelsea will want to strengthen, because you look on paper and flash forward to the beginning of next season and you say, well, who is Thomas Tuchel's centre-backs? And you can't even use centre-backs plural, because the only name that springs to mind is Thiago Silva. So another centre-back, if not 2, are going to have to come in, and Kounde is one of them. Then other names being linked, Dembele is on Chelsea's radar, loosely speaking, but there's nothing advanced yet. And the challenge is that Bowley is about fits and making sure that the dressing room stays almost fitted with personalities as well as talent, but also the chemistry has to be right to survive a managerial change as well. And Chelsea, more than most clubs, have been victims of being so cutthroat and then still handing control under Abramovich to previous managers. So that manager then gets the say and defines the dressing room, as you'd expect to some extent. But the last thing you want is to make a high volume of signings and then find, as you change from manager to manager to manager, there's a lot of spare parts. And I think what might put Bowley, if not Tuchel, but the ownership group off a player like Dembele, is he the right fit and personality? Because you look at the whole saga with Barcelona, and at one point it was a question between the relationship that Xavi had with Dembele. Then it was about Dembele supposedly asking for big wages. Then it shifted to the fact that they bought him for 117 odd million. So it was going to be the fee that they wanted to recoup if they were going to sell him. And all along, it's been unclear who's the real, and I use this word very loosely, victim in the process. Is Dembele the Barcelona outcast? And will he change and get a second wind wherever he moves to? Or actually is Dembele fighting for mega money and huge playing time and control? And then you're bringing in a player with an ego, and that's probably the wrong fit in Bowley's eyes. So don't discount the fact that a lot of clubs chasing after Dembele won't just look at the opportunity for the player, but also the personality behind it. And that might put Chelsea off. And then away from that particular individual, Chelsea are probably going to bring in a striker. They're likely to want a marquee name. Tuchel has already said that Lewandowski would be a fantastic signing. There's a number of other clubs chasing him. Barcelona remain the favourites, as I understand it. But is there any opportunity to sort of use some leverage around Lukaku, who has just got a new agent? So as a consequence, that agent will naturally be looking to either renegotiate with Chelsea or move Lukaku on and then benefit financially from that. And Lukaku has already said mid-season that he thinks he's got unfinished business at Inter. So were Lukaku to move, Inter is a more likely destination than Bayern. But can Chelsea manipulate that if they go in for Lewandowski and potentially look at some kind of trade-off? Because if Bayern are resigned now to Lewandowski leaving, and they have to be because Lewandowski has said, quote, his Bayern story is at an end, then naturally Bayern need a replacement. And they may see a sort of full circle opportunity in negotiation to, in their ideal world, get rid of Lewandowski because they have to and bring in Lukaku going the other way. There's a slim possibility of that. But what I think makes that logic fall down, even though it sounds very neat and interesting when you analyze it, is just that if Lukaku is presented with an opportunity between staying at Chelsea, Inter and Bayern, I think he ranks that as 1 Inter, 2 stays at Chelsea, 3 goes to Bayern Munich. And if Lewandowski is presented with an opportunity of Barcelona or Chelsea, I think he picks Barcelona. And that's why I think that trade deal is very unlikely. So Lukaku probably will leave Chelsea unless the new ownership group can convince him otherwise. And don't discount that possibility because, as I've said before, Bowley and his team are very hands-on and they are ultimately all about creating compelled footballers on and off the field, and that people-person mentality might change Lukaku's mind. But right now, because of his relationship with Chelsea and Tuchel before the new ownership group's time, if he does leave, I think the return to Inter is the most likely scenario.
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of that breakdown in everything else. So we sort of tweeted earlier about how he's kind of playing all sides a little bit, Lukaku, and I get why. And I understand it from a professional standpoint. It's almost, I'm happy to stay if this condition is met. I'd love to go back to Inter, but if none of that works, maybe something could be done with Bayern Munich. And Chelsea fans just want rid, don't they? I think all fans, we all do this. We live in this ideal world where we just want the player to 100% unequivocally want us, not think about any other club, not think about their future, and just, want to be completely dedicated. But the Lukaku story has been so murky since his return with, that interview and everything else. It feels to me just like he's pining for his ex, and Chelsea should do whatever they can to try and recoup as much money as possible and look elsewhere. I just get this feeling it could be disastrous for him. You talk about personalities in the dressing room. Having someone there that isn't fully bought in, and I just don't see Thomas Tuchel changing his style of play to a degree to get the best out of Lukaku. So I think they've got to move him on. How they do that and who comes in to replace him is a big question. There was a few people have been asking this question when you mentioned centre backs. Could Koulibaly be an option still for Chelsea, or is that going to be difficult for Chelsea to get done?
I think Newcastle are in the mix for sure for Koulibaly, and are confident of progressing those talks, at least to try and agree a deal with the player. But the challenge with Koulibaly is twofold. One, that Napoli just don't really want to sell. And two, the level of interest from other clubs in the mix. And if Chelsea are to spend big in this particular transfer window and 68 million or so goes on Kounde, and then that they're going to have to address that midfield area and potentially bring in a striker. Of course, they could spend more because they're comfortably within the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules, and they will inevitably generate some income from outgoings. But I think that they won't prioritise Koulibaly as their number one defensive target if, as is expected, they bring in Kounde first. And there's other clubs pushing more aggressively for him. Very good player and a decent signing. And also, I think that from all accounts at Napoli, the kind of dressing room fit that Bowley would be looking for. But there's a number of other clubs across Europe and in the Premier League chasing his signature. I think that Barcelona have previously explored that signing. Aston Villa are in the mix as well. If I had to name a Premier League club that are the most confident of at least progressing to an advanced stage, it remains Newcastle United. And maybe the final point to just say on Koulibaly is the age as well. At 30, doesn't necessarily quite fit the profile of how Chelsea would normally recruit, but they make exceptions, and Thiago Silva is a good example of that.
Yeah.
But the last thing they'll want, in my opinion, is to stock that defence with too many ageing players, because the whole point of the exodus, especially with any defenders and injuries they've had, is yes, they want experience, but they need to be making that next wave of signings for the long term and then bringing them through to the age of 30, 31, 32. If they can be opportunistic, then they will make a signing that's a little bit older, quite naturally. But if Chelsea fans were presented, even though, as I say, Koulibaly is a fantastic player with well over 250 odd games for Napoli, probably more like 300, and has been a goal scorer this season as well, with 2 or 3 goals in Serie A, and offers you versatility and strong positional sense. If you said to Chelsea your main 2 centre-backs are going to be Silva and Koulibaly at that point, challenging for the Premier League and playing in the Champions League, I just wonder whether 1 or 2 would start to question whether together that's when their age, despite their experience, would start to come under question.
Yeah, I think really, really good point. And I think quite a few Chelsea fans online have alluded to that, and that would be a concern. Question I've got, and it kind of leads a little bit into Tottenham as well, is they're looking at Bastoni, 23 years of age, brilliant defender. If Inter Milan want Lukaku, could there not be a way of trying to work out a deal that involves Lukaku and some money in the player? It would kind of tick a profile box and a player that Chelsea need, as well as getting rid of an issue and giving a goal scorer to Inter Milan. Is there any sort of word or talk on the ground that could be something Chelsea explore? Or is that very much the individual that Spurs are going after?
I think at the moment there's no talk of that, but this ownership group are brand new and we don't see that many player swaps. It's become quite an old-fashioned mentality within football that hasn't really carried through. And part of that, I think, is also down to the COVID-19 pandemic, where a club that might have previously considered a player swap now just wants as much cold, hard cash as possible. You look at the Arsenal offer in the January window for Vlahovic, and that had a player exchange, and Fiorentina still preferred a Juventus offer that provided them with more money up front. And
yes,
himself obviously also just wanted to make the move to Juventus. But I don't think that Chelsea have started that sort of approach with Inter or really any other clubs, even with Lewandowski and Bayern. It might be at the back of their mind that there's an element of leverage there that they can offer a player. But maybe what fans don't always understand is just that players, when they are leveraged in that almost American style trade as part of a deal, don't feel comfortable. And I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, they won't want the move, because as a fan, you can neatly connect the dots and say, well, if we give this team X and they give us Y and a bit of cash, everybody's happy. And that's true for the fans. That's true for the main incoming player. It's true for the buyer and the seller even, but not the player going the other way. And I remember a story a few years back with Jordan Henderson under Brendan Rodgers at Liverpool, and Rodgers didn't rate Henderson at that point, but he liked Clint Dempsey at Fulham. So off he went to Fulham through Liverpool's people and tried to create a part exchange deal plus a little bit of cash. And Dempsey was prepared to go to Liverpool, but Henderson just didn't want to go to Fulham. So the deal fell through. And that, again, is the challenge, that the player going the other way most of the time feels like, yikes, I'm just being thrown in for convenience. And does the club actually want me? Will I play? Is it right for me? Or am I almost being forced in the other direction? And that's why these player exchange deals are not as neat as fans would often like to make out when you just present them on paper. And as we said the last time I came on your show as well, it's because you also have to think about it through the head and the eyes of the footballer, and not just what it looks like when you round it off neatly from a outside in perspective. And of course, that way you think, yeah, there's leverage. It would work for both clubs. But if it doesn't work for the player going the other way, then the deal's off.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And something I've learned over years of covering this, when you read the sort of the aftermath of transfers, are so key. And Lukaku to Man United was a prime example of this. Chelsea appeared to be leading the race, but Man United did more courting, as you would call it. They phoned him more. They showed him more love. They made him feel like he was more wanted, and he changed his mind. And I think that's such an important part for players now, to feel like they are sort of front and center of the manager's mind and the club's mind. So I just a thought really on that. There's another player that was linked to Chelsea and Liverpool, looks set to become a Real Madrid player. What's the latest with Monaco midfielder Tchouameni?
As you say, Real Madrid now very confident of making that signing. And I don't think that there's a great deal that any other suitor can do at this point. So the latest, as I understand it, is that Real Madrid are in advanced talks to sign the Monaco midfielder. The fee will be under 70 million, but not by much. Most believe it will be something between 65 and 68 million. The other clubs that have been strongly in the mix are more like Liverpool and PSG, but Real are offering good money. They obviously want to act and bring in a marquee signing after failing to get either Haaland or Mbappe. And I think that it's just a good fit because they find themselves with a young 22-year-old who is versatile, who still has plenty of potential, primarily, of course, a defensive-minded midfielder, but it wouldn't at all surprise me as he develops if more of that box-to-box element comes into the game. And I know that Cesc Fabregas, ex-Arsenal and Monaco teammate, obviously, as well, had said that he could end up being morphed into that sort of number 10 role. Already capped for France as well. So it's just a good fit for Real, pacifies to some extent the fan base, although I think they're pretty happy at the moment after winning the Champions League. But clearly there's bad blood off the back of that Mbappe deal. And as I say, I think there were only really, and still are, if we're talking about it as not 100% official, 3 serious contenders that the player himself was considering. PSG, and I don't think that PSG have discounted making the signing despite Mbappe staying, but naturally if they're in the mix they'll have to balance their books even further and justify how they're able to bring in all of these players under financial fair play. So I don't think that their interest anymore is particularly serious. Liverpool were very much intent on the player though, but Real have essentially entered into advanced talks now, and I think that you'll see that deal confirmed over the next week or two relatively quickly. So I don't even think that that's a transfer debate now at this point, because the player wants to go to Real. Real want to sign the player. They've got effectively money to spare that they almost assumed a few months back or even a few weeks back they'd be spending on Mbappe through one form or another, with those incredible wages and sign-on fees and so on. They can now put them towards this young signing with unlimited potential and huge versatility in midfield. And I would say if we're talking about big name signings that are almost certain over the course of the coming weeks, then this is one of them, and he's heading to the Bernabeu.
Great update there, and your point you made about the money, it's one of my bugbears with the old-fashioned net spend argument, because Mbappe on the net spend calculator would have come up as 0. He most certainly wouldn't have cost you nothing to sign, even on a free. You have to give him shares in your business, shares in your company, whatever else you want. Whoever he wants to marry, he gets to have. Like, I don't know what the clauses are at PSG, but they're a madness. But I think Tchouameni and Camavinga together, the future of that midfield just feels so exciting and powerful and strong and technically gifted. And listen, Real Madrid, they just do rebuild properly, don't they? Like, we need a bit of a rebuild. Within a couple of years, they're full of stars again. They spend the money and they do it. They do it in the right way. Another midfielder, kind of in Spain currently, Frenkie de Jong. I know today he's done an interview where he stated that doesn't want to leave Barca. My personal feeling is, of course, he's going to say that at this point. I'm not even suggesting he wants to leave Barca, but he's just saying what he's meant to say. There's all different reports of they've got to raise £500 million by the end of June. There's talks of a big financial injection of around 720 20 million or so coming in from some investors. But the story isn't going away, and we're reading so many reports that the player is likening to the idea now. I've read reports from some of the Catalonian-based journalists that there's a deal between Man United and Barca. I think there's an English journalist about an hour ago, it might be Graham Bailey, I'm not too sure, who has said that United want it at a medical stage before the end of this little international period of games. We also know PSG have been linked to him as well, though. I mean, that was brought up on previous shows. What's the latest with Frenkie de Jong? Are Man United as far along the line as some journalists are making out? And could PSG come with a bit of a sting in the tail?
The thing to understand is that when a player like de Jong speaks out about his future, it's probably because a club like Manchester United had got quite far along, but past tense. I kind of am inclined, talking to people around de Jong and Barcelona, to believe his interview statement that he would prefer to stay at Barcelona. One of the main reasons for that is because he's bought a new multi-million-pound house there, which is not exactly the kind of move you do if you think you're about to go to Manchester. The Ten Hag factor allows Manchester United to be quite aggressive, and de Jong is definitely intrigued by what he can do there, but also not in a rush to leave Barcelona. And that's the sort of challenge Manchester United have got, that if you're de Jong, you want to play Champions League football. Manchester United don't have that. If you're de Jong, you understand Manchester United's interests, but you can wait until January and see where they are in the table, or even next summer. And at the same time, settle in your new multi-million-pound house. And I am inclined to be less cynical, therefore, about questioning his public statement, and genuinely believe that Barcelona are happy to keep him, and he would also like to stay at that football club. That's not to say, therefore, that Manchester United haven't got quite far in the process. And as I said just a moment ago, usually when a player makes a statement like that, it is because they've been weighing up their options. And you can either interpret his public comments as he has come to a final decision, or alternatively, you can call it gamesmanship, which in turn obviously alerts Manchester United to be more aggressive, or allows the de Jong camp to get an even better deal. So Manchester United have got a lot of work to do on this, because they haven't been able to, from contact, which has definitely happened historically over the last few months, convince de Jong that United is the right fit, for two main reasons. One, as I say, they haven't got Champions League football, although when they first started talking, they stood a better chance compared to now, where it's obviously definitive that they're not playing. But we're talking about contact a few months back, where United were still in the mix if they could string a run together. And the second factor is obviously that when an approach was first made, it was Ralf Rangnick and his people, and de Jong may have had it intimated to him that Ten Hag would be confirmed. But certainly when an approach was first made, Ten Hag had not told Manchester United at that point that he was definitely going to join the football club. So when Manchester United have done their planning from the end of the January window onwards, there's a huge amount of instability, and the team not also doing well on the football field, which makes it very difficult to get a player of this caliber. And then add to the mix that Barcelona are probably going to want 75 million or so, roughly within that bracket. It's going to be hard for Manchester United to pull in de Jong. My understanding with PSG is that they've dropped their interest in him, and he's not a player anymore on their radar. So United will obviously be quite pleased to hear that. But de Jong's preference, as per his interview, is just to stay at Barcelona. And we'll wait and see over the coming weeks whether Manchester United try and circle back more aggressively, or whether those comments prove disingenuous. But when I heard that interview, and I coupled it, as I say, with the fact that he's just bought a new house in Barcelona, I genuinely feel that that's the football club at the Camp Nou where he wants to settle in at least the next 12 months.
And listen, I think your roundup is very compelling and comprehensive. And I agree with it almost to the full extent. The only element where I felt all along this deal was I haven't felt at any point Jong was going to go, do you know what? United seems a better option for me, because we're not in a great place right now. There's no Champions League football. The only way I've always felt this deal happens is if the reports around Barca's financial circumstances are bleak and they actually have to sell. So if they're in a position where it's like, Frenkie, we have to get rid of you, that was the only kind of hope as a Man United fan I really had. But if these new reports today are true of this huge injection of hundreds of millions of pounds are coming in, there's no chance. There's no chance. If they don't need the money, Barca, why are you selling one of the best midfielders in the world? It doesn't even make sense in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, look, the only way for me I see it is if Barca need money. That can change things and everything else. But no, I do agree with that. With
Just,
that take,
Terry, I was going to say you're absolutely right as to Barcelona being out of control to some extent, and they've obviously been here before, so they have to be able to register Frank Kessie and Andreas Christiansen, and that will prompt some form of outgoings. And it's amazing, really, to think that this isn't the first time it's happened, which tells you what a mess their finances are. So a welcome injection of cash from a signing like De Jong, around 75 million, is naturally going to be something that they might have to consider. But I think that Dembele is the first one that they'll want to try and get rid of, to then allow them to be up and running with these new signings that they've already brought in. And just whilst we're sort of on Barcelona, the farce of the situation, and we talk about Manchester United and instability, but the crazy thing with Barcelona is, again, they're talking to players whilst it's unclear when they're actually going to formally be able to sign them due to their finances. So Rafinha is another one at Leeds that is definitely on Barcelona's radar. And again, you're trying to convince a player to go to Spain. You're attempting to rebuild a new culture at the football club under a Barcelona legend, and you keep falling into the same mistakes over and over again. And that is the challenge for Barca with keeping up with Real Madrid and contending in the Champions League, that they are trying to run, financially speaking, before they can walk. And they've been doing this now for decades. And as other players come into the mix and new rules like financial fair play are introduced, it just re-illustrates once again how important a Super League would have been financially to a club like Barcelona. And it's almost like less about protecting the brand and giving you a constant entry into Europe's elites, because Barcelona, like many other big European clubs, have that swagger anyway to say, well, we're always going to be there. People are always going to know who we are. The Super League for Barcelona was actually about debt refinancing. It was solely about moving into a new elite that sort of wiped away all of the financial woes and allowed them to play in a new league on their terms with enough cash injection to balance the books. And having banked on that, then obviously prior to that had the pandemic as well. This is a club that is still in financial ruin, which makes it staggering each time that their shopping list or their short list is so incredibly long and so expensive that you say, well, hang on a minute, you want Rafinha from Leeds United? You're going to have to spend a ton of money, and he's going to expect incredible wages, and you already can't balance the books. So somehow they keep managing these free transfers. They keep being able to get a player in and then almost freeze the transfer until they're allowed to sell somebody and then balance the books. And personally, I don't agree with that. If at the time of buying the incoming, you cannot accommodate them due to your finances, then that deal should be off, as opposed to allowing a football club to stack up new signings and then wait and wait and wait. Because what if they can't get rid of anybody and then the window closes? It's not really fair to their competitors, and it's not financially prudent either.
Well, is that I've also read, and again, you read these things, fairly credible journalists talking about there's something like £50 million, euros of deferred wages for Gerard Piqué. Yeah, and again, they've not just come from some fly-by-night merchants. These are fairly credible reports, and you just think to yourselves, I don't get why. I suppose it's the power of Barca, the money that Barca can generate, the global fan base, where there's almost an element of our name would get us through. And I saw someone tweet something earlier that, a big club like that would never go under. It could never go wrong. Well, people have said that about many big companies, many big organizations in the past. And me and you are of a certain vintage where I just say the word Woolworths. But yeah, look, I'm not comparing Barca to Woolworths, but we've seen things go wrong in the past if people step up. But we'll see what happens there, ladies and gentlemen. Viewers, do us a big favor and smash the like and share button. More updates from Ben to come. But I need you to hit the subscribe button as well and get in any questions that you may have. Now, where was I? In terms of, we spoke quite a bit about Chelsea. We know Tottenham have brought in Ivan Perisic now. I'll stay with Man United for a moment. Darwin Nunez, again, a variety of reports in the last 4 or 5 days from it's close, it's not, he wants Champions League football, etc. From your understanding, where is the Darwin Nunez transfer situation currently at?
So I think the main thing with Nunez, to reiterate, is that he is Ten Hag's number one priority. So if Manchester United are going to fling around just under 70 million, Nunez is the player that they absolutely want. And by all accounts, that deal is now getting pretty close. And the main thing from Manchester United's point of view is that they've had to fight off a lot of suitors from within the Premier League and all across Europe. And the reason for that is naturally just because Nunez is an incredible player and talent and fits almost every single criteria for a top football club. Only 22 years of age, again, pretty versatile, has played for his country, so has got international experience, has turned out getting on for 100 times for Benfica and scored almost 50 times in all competitions, has played almost 150 games in his career and has scored virtually 70 goals, plus assists. There's decent pace and there's a lot of movement off the ball too. So this is a really good and exciting fit for not just Manchester United, but any of the top clubs really interested in him. And the challenge, I think, for Manchester United as they take a deal from very close to over the line is again going to be other suitors who might come into the mix and gate crash the deal that either have a little bit more money in terms of the overall package or can offer Champions League football. So if we talk about the contenders who have also scouted Nunez and made inquiries, loosely speaking, Barcelona, but that is the least likely of the suitors. Chelsea have been interested and don't discount the new ownership group ramping up their interest there. And that's one thing I'd say, by the way, on Chelsea, that the Bowley-Clearlake group are going to let the existing Chelsea personnel from the Abramovich regime facilitate a transitional period. Yeah. But that's not to say that by January, but if they have to be opportunistic with Nunez, who's going to go in this window earlier, they'll have their own stamp on who they want the marquee signings to be. So I don't think they'll be that bullish, and I don't think they'll be coming to Tuchel and picking any names, but they might be opportunistic, and Nunez is definitely somebody for that price tag that's good value for money. So Chelsea, again, are at the back of the queue, but could be the dark horse simply because under a new ownership group now, they may choose to move a little bit faster. And then you've got Newcastle, who have been interested in Nunez. I don't think that he's particularly attracted by that, but they're able to offer big wages. And Manchester United, and some would say Liverpool as well in the mix, especially if Sadio Mane leaves. But Manchester United definitely see themselves as the front runners. And the difference between Nunez and some of the other players that we've mentioned is he is not there negotiating, saying, well, really, I want Champions League football, or I desperately want sky-high wages. He's sold by the history of Manchester United and the potential, as well as now Ten Hag, who's going to play a big part in getting the deal over the line. So there will be other suitors that perhaps try and gate crash this deal, but as of the time that we are speaking, Nunez to Manchester United is the most likely destination, and that deal is very close.
Thank you very much, Ben. Viewers, what's your take on that? Darwin Nunez always with fandom always seems to split opinion a lot. He's very raw. He's got a lot to learn. What I would say in response to that is you probably can't find. There's not very many better managers in Europe to sign for if you still need to develop and learn and be nurtured and become your full self. And look, as a United fan, I'm getting more and more excited about that deal, especially as we need someone else up front with Cavani going, Martial going, of course, Mason Greenwood not coming back. Well, as far as we know, I cannot see a scenario where he comes back to Manchester United. So yeah, be interesting to see what happens there. Viewers, what do you think? One of the other deals we spoke about behind this, it's still on Man United. We mentioned earlier, Jesse Lingard. Where do you feel like he's going to end up? Could it be a return to West Ham? Could a team like Newcastle be getting themselves geared up to move towards him? They're looking, I know, at Dean Henderson. What's the latest in that surrounding?
I sort of feel sorry for Jesse Lingard. First of all, because I don't think that Manchester United have utilised his potential. Now at 29, he doesn't quite fit what Ten Hag is looking for, but he's just been loaned out over and over again. And then he hit that purple patch during his West Ham spell where he scored 9 Premier League goals in 16 games, I believe. And even when he was down in the Championship at Birmingham, he was scoring goals. You have to go a few years back for that. But let's not forget, he's been at Manchester United since 2011. And last season, he only got 2 goals. The previous season, 2020-21, he was at West Ham playing in those 16 games, played 0 times for Manchester United in the Premier League. And obviously what caused the constant loaning out was the fact that the goals never came. And he's never got into Premier League double figures. I think his best season for Manchester United was 3 or 4 years ago, where he scored 8 goals. And at that point, he was playing pretty regularly. And then from West Ham's point of view, they're looking at him and saying, well, in 2020-21, he got 9 goals in only 16 games. And for the price that he would be available, under 15 million, that's great value. And that's exactly why West Ham want him. But Newcastle have also pushed hard for exactly the same reasons. I think that what makes West Ham a more likely destination is that Newcastle have changed their approach now because they've guaranteed safety. So, of course, Lingard was a player that they wanted in January, and they would have definitely taken him over Chris Wood because Lingard was in form if you judge him by what he'd done at West Ham, and basically half the price of Chris Wood with, on paper, more goals and possibly a more long-term player for Newcastle, because obviously if Newcastle start challenging for the Champions League, Chris Wood is not going to be playing week in, week out, so could find himself as a bit of a loose end there. So if we're judging it historically, Lingard, having spoken to his agent, was very close to Newcastle. It was only Manchester United that blocked that deal at the last minute. Lingard and his people and Newcastle thought that was done. But I don't really see Newcastle fighting that hard again to sign Lingard, because they're looking at a slightly higher or more prolific caliber of strikers to work alongside Callum Wilson, who's obviously also getting on a bit, and move above Chris Wood in the pecking order. So Lingard would be a good squad player for Newcastle, but I'm not convinced that he plays week in, week out, whereas at West Ham United, he's obviously got an affinity, and I think David Moyes would continue to utilise him as he did during the loan spell in 2020-21. So West Ham will feel quite confident in that deal. The only thing that could complicate it is that West Ham also want Armando Broja, who's had a great season on loan at Southampton from Chelsea, and I think that they won't bring in both players. So it'll be interesting to see what Tuchel does with Broja, because he was excluded from the Southampton squad for the final game of the season back at Chelsea. And if you talk to Chelsea, then they say that Tuchel will simply assess in the pre-season as to whether he wants to loan Broja out again, sell him, or ultimately integrate him into the first team. But if you speak to other clubs around the game, they definitely think that Broja is there and available for sale. So that's another one to watch. But I think with Lingard, West Ham is the most likely destination.
Yeah, it might be one of those cases of if they're looking at both but can only do one, it's delaying. That becomes a chicken and the egg, doesn't it, really, in the transfers? They won't want to delay Lingard too long in case another suitor comes in. But equally, they end up signing Lingard and then Broja becomes available. You end up missing out on that if the finances are not there. But it's certainly going to be interesting to see what those teams do, especially Newcastle with the money they've now gotten. You know, they brought in Dan Ashworth, who I think is a tremendous director of football to help run the football operations there. So they're going to be getting, you know, you look at the quality of player Brighton signed, like pound for pound, you're hard pushed to find a better run club in England over the last 4 or 5 years than Brighton. The fact that he's there now is going to be absolutely massive. There's a few questions here for you. First one here says, Terry, could Spurs really get Bastoni?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. And one thing that's really interesting about that deal is it comes straight off the back of Levy injecting that 150 million. And the belief is, talking to Spurs sources, that will be put onto a transfer budget. So therefore, the money is available for Conte to spend. And I think that when you have Champions League football, there's absolutely no reason why they can't bring in Bastoni. And the other thing about Tottenham to understand is that they're moving quickly in the market, as we've seen with Ivan Perisic. And I think that's going to be a brilliant signing as well. They'll want to ensure that they keep hold of Son. There might be some interest there, by the way, from Liverpool potentially. Again, if Mane ends up leaving. But just coming back to Bastoni, I think the only challenge that is going to face Tottenham, in my opinion, is whether they can actually agree terms with the player. So not that they don't have the money there per se, because they obviously do, but can they actually convince him about the Tottenham project? And that's where Conte comes in and has to sort of do a lot of the legwork. And you find this with a lot of players, I think anyway, and many agents will agree that I've spoken to, who have been around that like Italian culture. So, you know, in Bastoni's case, at 23 years of age, he started the younger part of his career at Atalanta, and then he's moved to Inter Milan, and he's got himself double figures of Italy caps. And during his time with Inter, he's played 120 odd games, and he finds himself very settled. And his dad was also a left back, and he's very family orientated. And then you're basically saying, go and move to England, where there's a media glare. And sure, there's more money, but you're playing in London. It's a different climate. It's a different language. And that's where Conte has to really come in and sort of show that he can manage that player on a hands-on level and help him with the transition. Otherwise, I think that you have a scenario where Inter are either going to be able to persuade him to stay, or there'll be other clubs outside potentially of the Premier League that are just able to sort of swoop in and offer him the culture that he's looking for. And the reason that I say that is because we saw exactly the same thing with Vlahovic again, where Arsenal did everything possible to get that player. Wages, package, selling the role in the team, etc. And yet Juventus was the choice. Why? Because it was just player preference. And that, again, is exactly the same with Bastoni. But this is a player that Conte wants. And also, the other thing to add is sees as a bargain, because I think the transfer fee will be between 45 and 50 million. That's my understanding from kind of asking around.
Yeah.
And for a player of his caliber, a real superstar who will arrive young but kind of the finished package, that's absolutely incredible. That's just a really, really good value. And if it works out, then you get a superstar. If it doesn't work out, then you're probably going to get your money on that. So I think that everything is looking quite promising, and Spurs are actively pursuing that player. His salary is roughly within what Spurs pay. I mean, it will be in excess of 100k a week, but you're not talking anything stupid like in the upper echelons of 150 plus thousand. It's sort of low 100,000 odd is the wages. And as I say, there's some negotiations to be done. That's by no means a done deal. But the short answer to that question, not that I ever give a short answer, but the short answer to that question is that Spurs want Bastoni. Conte has to sell that deal. There's still some negotiations to be done, but definitely on their radar.
The fact you don't give short answers is brilliant. I mean this with respect to other journalists. I call them the bullet point journalists. I like detail, understanding, and where you're coming from. So I like it, my friend. There's a question here that says Gavi to Liverpool. Obviously, Liverpool, I don't know if it was shock news about Mane saying that he's going to be leaving. Of course, there was the Tchouameni stuff they were looking at. There's links now to Gavi. But on Mane, first of all, it sounds like he's highly likely to leave. That's my understanding. What is it you've heard yourself surrounding Liverpool and their window?
It's a strange one, isn't it? Because Mane had said that he had a, quote, special announcement to make after the UCL. And then presumably because they lost the final, he hasn't yet provided it. And most people thought that was a hint that he was going to be moving on. The most important thing to stress is that he has not communicated to Liverpool that he is leaving in any official capacity. So Liverpool may be planning for his exit. It may have been intimated to them. But as Jurgen Klopp said pre-match, when he was also asked about links with Bayern Munich, they are at the moment just rumours. And I think it is one of those rumours where there's no smoke without fire. But again, there is nothing absolutely definitive or concrete. And that may be why Mane, who perhaps thought there'd be progression when he first said he had that special announcement, has chosen to delay. Plus, as I say, the fact that Liverpool lost the Champions League, maybe we'll find out more on this as we get a bit of spacing between that Champions League final defeat into the off-season. But it does look like Mane is open to leaving Liverpool for a new challenge, which would obviously then force them to replace him. And Gavi is seemingly just unhappy at Barcelona, so that provides hope to try and bring him in. And as I've already alluded to, it wouldn't at all surprise me if Liverpool are looking at a player like Son. And the only challenge if Mane goes and Son was the type of natural replacement is that why are Spurs going to now sell Son because they've got Champions League football? And Son doesn't strike me as the kind of character that would jump ship from that Spurs project when he's in red hot form and playing in the Champions League and has got such an intuitive partnership with Harry Kane. But it would have been really, really interesting if Spurs hadn't made Champions League football to see what would happen as far as Son is concerned, especially if Mane leaves Liverpool. And to give you like that little bit of insight, again, one of the reasons why this is what I call an uncertain period in the days before the transfer window formally opens is because the way that football clubs work is that they plan 2 or 3 transfer windows ahead, some even further. So many scouts will tell you the day they buy a player is the day they start planning to replace that player, even if they're young, because there's the opportunistic aspect in a transfer window where you just swoop and one player moves and it has a domino effect. And then there's the planned process where you almost try and go under the radar. And that's exactly what Liverpool do at times. They don't turn up into scouting boxes. Sometimes they just buy a ticket in the away end and they watch with the hardcore fans and they talk to them about a player because they're trying to kind of learn those things that you can't judge. They're not just there as statistics. They want to know about the mentality. What do the fans think? How marketable is the player? And so on. And you're doing all of that in the gap between transfer windows. And you're also maybe thinking 2 windows ahead. So then what happens is after January, you plan and plan and plan. And if in January you see Son is in form, you say, well, he might be available because Spurs are not necessarily definite for Champions League football. And a club like Liverpool are fighting for the quadruple. And then you get close to the end of the season, having maybe started those talks. I'm not now speaking specific about Son, but I'm just trying to allow fans to understand how intricate and fluid the process is. You start talking to a player. Arsenal, for example, took 2 different windows to talk to Tielemans with a view to get him in this window. And that's what you have to do. You have to court the player and lay the groundwork. And you basically have to get them to agree to your project perhaps before they're available. So then when they are available, you're ready to swoop. And that's what gives you the advantage. So then you suddenly hit the end of the season and you might have planned a player like Son for 3 or 4 months, let's just say hypothetically since January. And then at the very last minute, 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the season, Tottenham beat Arsenal, Arsenal lose to Newcastle, Spurs win at Norwich, they leapfrog Arsenal, they end up in the Champions League. And suddenly that whole dynamic around Son changes. And that's why when you're reading media reports throughout a season, you'll see something in January or February or March, and then you'll wonder why it's incorrect or it's changed. And that can be down to these things, like a team that didn't look like qualifying for Champions League football suddenly does qualify for Champions League football. The player can have a change of heart. A new offer can be presented. They might have leveraged the deal that had started against the current club they're at. And this makes this period now really, really difficult to assess, because if you're a player like Son, you might well have been open to a move away from Spurs in January, February, March, April, even early May, potentially. And now suddenly you're delighted with Spurs. You've seen the new investment that's going to be spent on players. Perisic has come in. You've obviously finished the season as the joint Golden Boot winner. And I think a player like that now is locked into the Spurs project, at least for next season, which means that if Liverpool were looking at him, they now have to change their plans. And therefore, as players finish the season and reflect, Sterling is another good example of a player only now really thinking about his future. And as a consequence, clubs that have courted him since January are basically saying, well, what is your answer and position? And if it's different to it was between January and the end of the season, those football clubs that thought they stood a chance have to reassess, and vice versa. Football clubs that were told in January the player wasn't going to go may now suddenly have to scramble because circumstances changed again. And as a journalist, that is what makes this period in particular now, end of season until the window is formally open, pretty complicated to cover, because you just get a lot of competing narratives coming from the player, from the agent, from the buying club, and from the selling club, and they don't always match.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting. I have a lot of sympathy with journalists at this time of the year, because as you've just explained, and this is why I'll be honest with you, I haven't told you this even privately, but this is why I like journalists such as yourself that will take the time to explain things to people, because you might have a journalist that tweets something or writes an article in January saying, you know, Man United are leading the race to sign Darwin Nunez as an example. Say you write that article today, it isn't your fault that if in 3 days' time Real Madrid go, Real Madrid suddenly go, right, we're in for you now, and they change his mind and he goes in another direction, and a lot of that goes on. And equally, I see this a lot from fans. You get 4 different journalists from sometimes 3 different continents, all have a slight variation of a story around a player, or sometimes some big differences. And you see these kind of tweets around, well, the story keeps changing. The media are taking us for mugs. And I'm sort of thinking, it isn't the same journalist changing his story every week. It's different people that are speaking to different individuals. For me, that's the fun part. As a fan, it's, that's a different story. That makes sense. I like that point. And I kind of just put it all together and then make my own mind up. That's kind of how I feel like the world should be. Plus, it's transfers and it's not as serious as like life or death. And some people, you must have had those kind of responses from people in your, like on Twitter, where people take it so seriously, like the world depends upon it. But I totally get where you're coming from. And Liverpool, if they lose Mane, I've said it all week. I've used Harry Kane and Lewandowski as the example, but I feel like they need to do something big. And I'm sure they've got something up their sleeve, and they're planning that their scouting system and their recruitment team have been so potent and so good. Whether it is a big name or it's someone that can come in and fill that void, I'm sure they've got some plans around that. Final one before I know you've got to go. A lot of people are asking about Bissouma, about to Chelsea, also Tielemans updates as well. Is there anything changed in the last week around Bissouma's next club and the potential transfer of Yuri Tielemans?
Tielemans remains a ongoing process, and Arsenal are very confident of signing him. The last time we spoke about Tielemans, I made the point that it needs to be established whether he does or doesn't want Champions League football. And a lot of Arsenal fans have sort of come back on social media and said, well, he's happy with Europa League football, and that's their opinion. That was not the point that he made to Arsenal or any other club when he's spoken to them, either in January or last summer. He was very clear that he does want Champions League football, but he has to assess his options. And when the two front runners that are trying to sign him are Manchester United and Arsenal, and the club that he's currently at is Leicester City, if you have to choose between those three, none of them have got Champions League football. But of course, there's a hope on the side of the agent that a club outside of the Premier League might come in. And there's journalists in Spain that are reporting that Real Madrid would be a good fit. And that might be true. But again, if Real are going to bring in a big name signing in that area and keep Modric and Kroos for another season, then how many games would Yuri Tielemans play in that position at Real Madrid? Very few, I would posit. And as a consequence, that has to be part of his thinking, because let's not forget, he rejected Arsenal before he joined Monaco. Why? Not because he didn't like the club or the vision, but because he was worried he wouldn't have that much game time. And when a player comes from Monaco playing all the time, Leicester playing all the time, and then makes another step with respect to Leicester, they're my team, but a step up to Arsenal in terms of at least the wages and the stadium and the brand, even if not necessarily on the football field, he has to feel again that he's going to be playing regular first team football, which would be the case at Arsenal and wouldn't be the case at Real Madrid. And then beyond that, is he going to wait and see whether a team in the Champions League come in for him, or pursue, I think, what his original thinking would have been, which is that Arsenal is the club that he's going to end up at? And as things stand, no decision has been made on that. Arsenal continue to intimate that they are confident. The narrative really for the last 2 months has been that Yuri Tielemans is the front runner to join Arsenal, and that Manchester United have less, or probably now under Ten Hag, no chance of signing him, and Tielemans won't stay at Leicester. So it's one to watch over the coming weeks. As I say, in the next 10 days or so, especially as we get other movement in his position, a new club might enter the mix, and Tielemans might do a bit more of a wait and see approach. So if I was Arsenal, I would be, again, being very firm and quick, something that they tried to do with Vlahovic in January, make an early offer and a swoop for a marquee signing. Unfortunately, Juventus gatecrashed that deal, but they still deserve credit, Arteta, Edu and the team at Arsenal, for putting themselves out there and being ambitious. They'll be criticised generally for that January transfer window, but in their failure, we saw one silver lining, which is they were prepared to find big money and swoop. And I would say Arsenal need to try and wrap up a deal for Tielemans quickly, because the longer it goes on and they don't sign him, the more likely it is that another suitor will come in who maybe can offer Champions League football, because Tielemans is definitely at that level. And then with Bissouma, I must admit it's not one that I've necessarily been as across as other transfers. I think that if you look at what a player like that can bring, it's obvious that Bissouma is going to be in huge demand. And we know already that Aston Villa have had a rejected bid, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to now say, well, Dan Ashworth has gone to Newcastle and Bissouma had a record-breaking season for Brighton. So could Newcastle come into the mix now that they've got a new director of football? That is clearly not a unthinkable logic, but that is just me putting 2 and 2 together. And as I will say openly, when I haven't actively tried to pursue an individual transfer, Bissouma is not one that I've been making too many inquiries about. Arsenal, Manchester City, even Marseille outside of the Premier League are all looking at him. And at this stage, I have no other real insight or information to give you on Bissouma other than if you know that Brighton are not going to keep hold of him, and you know that Dan Ashworth has just joined Newcastle, and you know that Manchester City and countless other clubs, like even Liverpool, certainly Arsenal, have tracked him, Aston Villa on the radar as well. Definitely a player that is going to move this summer, but no personal or exclusive information at my end as to where his next destination may be.
Thank you. And Ben, always a pleasure to speak. Viewers, thank you very, very much for getting involved and asking your questions. A little bit of banter in there as well. Doesn't go unnoticed. Please smash the like button before you leave and subscribe to the Football Terrace. Ben, until next time, you take care of yourself. Viewers, God bless.